All right, let's roll into some fitness stuff, man. I know you. That's our forte. But today, I want to talk about what I learned from training with full body routines. So way back in the day, I'll give you kind of a little bit of a background here. Way back in the days, the silver era, the bronze era of bodybuilding, those guys trained with full body routines. So they would train 3 days a week was like the typical standard, and they would train full body each time. So that has evolved over time. Arnold came around, and then they discovered the split routine, or the marketing department discovered the split routine, and training body parts multiple times a week and separating the body like that. And it seems as though over the past couple of years that full body routines have made like a runaround back, right, and cycled back. Yeah. So I've been training full body routines. My routine is definitely unique, so don't copy what I'm doing, but I've kind of experimented with it. So I wanted to talk about the benefits of it, some of the cons of it, and one of the things I've learned about training from it. And I think one of the things too is every time I experiment with something, I always learn a little bit more about muscle building from a different way of looking at it. So, well, first, I don't know if have you ever done like a full body routine like religiously or?
Yeah. I've done it a few different ways. I've done the typical 3-day-a-week full body routine, which is pretty much the basic way you can do full body. That's the way bodybuilders did it originally, usually Monday, Wednesday, Friday, train the entire body. 5 sets of 5 is usually kind of like a bread and butter system to use within the full body. My personal favorite way that I have run full body in the past is full body every other day. So instead of going Monday, Wednesday, Friday, you would go again on Sunday, and it would just keep rotating. The reason I like that is because you get a perfect ratio of training to rest. So there's just 1 day of training, 1 day of rest, 1 day of training, 1 day of rest. And I felt like personally for me the reason the results were so good with that is no matter how much work you did in 1 day, you're still balancing it out with a complete day of rest. So it's almost impossible to fatigue yourself to the point where training sessions will suffer from one hard session. So there's many different ways to do it. My experience with full body is it's very good. Especially, like I said, when you can do a higher frequency of hitting body parts every other day. But the one downside I found with it is you have to be very, very specific with the workouts and the movements you do. Otherwise, they can become extremely long, and they can become unproductive if you're trying to cram in too many big compound movements in one session. So you have to be very specific with your training when doing a full body.
Well, one of the benefits of full body training is you're not... So, again, we've come from the background of okay... When we first started, it was you have to train one body part a day. Mm-hmm. That was the whole thing. And you blitz that body part into oblivion.
Right.
And then you wait 7 days for that body part to recover.
Yeah.
So from the sense of recovery ability, you're only really doing 1, maybe 2 exercises per body part.
Yeah.
So it's not fatiguing at all, actually.
No.
So you're going in, you're doing maybe 1 or 2 movements for back, and then you're moving on to something else.
Right.
So I think the benefit in that sense is you're able to focus more on some of the movements. So if we cycle back, and I probably should have printed out Reg Park's routine because I think that's a good example. I actually have one of those old school magazines that has his routine in there. But he would do all the basic compounds. Bench press, rows, squats, and that's exhausting.
Yes.
That's exhausting.
To do it all
but the cool part is you're not exhausted from the body parts there.
Right. It's not a local fatigue.
Right. You're really literally hitting chest to failure. Well, failure is whatever. You're exhausting chest in that one movement. You're focusing on the one movement, and then you're moving on to the next movement. So I think that benefit, you're able to definitely train harder because now there's really no overlap between those different exercises. You can do hard sets of squats, and then right after that go into hard sets of bench press, and then go into hard sets of back and be fine.
Yeah. And the cool thing about doing that too is when you look at it on a weekly basis, so when you look at the work you did in a week, if you were taking the example like you said of doing one body part all in one session, if you took that exact work and let's just say it was 3 exercises, or typically a one body part session probably has 3, 4, 5 exercises. But let's say you did 3 and you spread it out on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. If you literally took the exact same routine and you spread it out like that, normally you're doing 3 exercises in a row for the same muscle group. By the second and third, those are going to suffer because you're doing them after you already did a few hard sets in the first exercise.
Yeah.
So let's just say you're doing 5 by 5 on Monday, and then you have 3 by 8 and 3 by 10, let's say, on the other 2 workouts. If you were to do those all in one workouts, those 3 by 8 and 3 by 10, you're going to be using much heavier weights by doing it on Wednesday and Friday as opposed to doing it all on Monday because of all the local fatigue in that one session. So just by spreading them out over Wednesday and Friday, you're going to be handling more weight in the gym. You're going to be doing more total volume that way. So the quality of work is better when it's spread out throughout the week.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's one of the major benefits of
Yeah.
it. It's also a lot faster in the gym. You're not spending hours in the gym. I can get through one of those routines a lot quicker. So one of the things that I've realized, and I've realized a couple things over the course of my lifting career, right, as far as like how to gain muscle. So I've mentioned this a lot of times. Frequency is one of the most important aspects of training. You need to be able to hit muscles frequently. You need to be able to track your total volume. That's another thing that's going to stimulate muscles so you're able to build. But what I'm noticing with full body routines is volume per lift is more important, I think, than anything else. Because with full body routines, you're only doing maybe 3-4 sets max of the lift because your overall volume gets spread out throughout however many times a week you're working out. But if you're training, let's say it's 3 sets. I'll just give you an example. So let's say it's 3 sets I'm doing of, I don't know, whatever, lateral raises or whatever it is, right? Because over the course of the week, my volume is managed, right? So it's the same volume all week. When I do that and all of that volume in one session, it's too much. But when I do only 3 sets per workout, it's not enough. Okay. It's not enough. Yeah. So one of the things that I'm learning when it comes to building more muscle is there's definitely a stimulus per workout that you need to hit no matter what that is.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Yeah. And I think a lot of people don't look at that. So, you'll get the whole idea that, okay, the weekly volume is what matters the most, and I do agree that's the most important thing you need to look at, but you also need to look at each individual stimulus throughout the entire week. So a lot of times the one body part per week frequency, might have the exact same volume as a 2 or 3 times per week frequency, and in theory you would think that would be, okay, it's the same amount of volume per week, so it's the same thing. But if the stimulus is so high in one session, it could be counterproductive past a certain point. So if you cram too many sets into one session, it's such a high stimulus that now your body just has to get back to baseline before you can even think about having an anabolic effect or a strength or performance effect. So when you do too much in one session, you're actually inhibiting yourself because now you have more to recover from, versus if you kind of just spiked it a little bit, let it go back to baseline, spiked it again, let it go back to baseline, and then over time you're going to get stronger, you're going to get bigger doing that. But it's the same thing like you mentioned. If you do too little, even if the frequency is very high, you're not causing a big enough stimulus. We use the analogy when we talked about going out in the sun. If you go out in the sun and it takes, let's just say, a half hour, an hour to get some type of color, even if you go out in the sun every single day, but it's only 5 minutes, you might never get a tan. So it's the same thing. I mean, the tanning analogy actually works pretty well in so many cases. So, you go outside every single day for 5 minutes, but if it's not enough to get any base color, it doesn't matter how many days you do it. So it's definitely a stimulus, a minimum stimulus you need per session.
Well, one of the things too is that stimulus is always going to change.
Of course, yeah.
So you'll adapt, your body adapts to anything that you do to it, and your body is crazy good at adapting to whatever you do. It's insane how much your body can adapt. So I'm at the point right now where I took my little, and I think this is the best way to do anything. You got to keep track of the total for the week, and then from there, you break it down per session to what you're doing. So now what I did was that total volume that I was doing, it's not enough per workout. So now I need to up that volume. But I just thought that was super interesting because I never paid attention to per session volume because the session volume was always so high because of the split that I had.
Right.
Split that I was doing where I broke down into body parts, training them multiple times a week. But when you're training full body and you spread it out a lot, that volume really goes down per workout.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And there's a balance that needs to be made. People usually go from one extreme to the other. So it's like, I'm going to do all my sets in one session, or I'm going to do almost no sets, but I'm going to spread it out across the weekend. Yeah. There's definitely that sweet spot. And I'd say the sweet spot in most cases, at the bare minimum, if you're doing less than 3 sets for that body part in one session, you may as well tack it on to another session. I don't think it needs its own day. And then once you're going over, I'd say about 20 sets, maybe even a little bit before that, but like at the absolute maximum, if you're doing more than 20 sets for one body part in a session, you're definitely overkill. You're in overkill territory, and I think you could benefit from splitting it up. It's a big range, but that's probably the sweet spot where most of your sets should be per session.
Well, remember, you're also going to have fatigue that, with a full body routine, it's like, okay, I did heavy bench press on Monday, let's just say, and then Wednesday, I'm doing heavy incline. Right. So, you'll be a little bit fatigued from that, but not really because your body adapts to it, so you'll be able to get stronger in that lift. So that's one of the things you need to keep in mind too. But again, if you did 3 sets on Monday and then you're doing 3 sets again on Wednesday, it's not that fatiguing. But over time, if you need to stimulate muscle, you got to bump that up.
Yeah, your body's always going to adapt to what you do on a regular basis. So there has to be, if you keep things static, very hard to progress over time.
And that's a good point. It reminds me of your diet.
Yeah.
Not your diet, but a diet in general. It reminds me of dieting in general. Like your metabolism is never static. It's never static. No. It's always moving up and down. And one of the things I've noticed with diet too, it's like, okay, if you're in a period of reverse dieting or maintenance, your metabolism kind of catches up and then it levels out again. Yeah, and might even drop a little bit.
Always, yep.
So you have to kind of always be moving those macros around because that, like, your metabolism is not steady either.
Yeah.
But this is what makes fitness so, one, unique, and two, very, very hard to manage because there's a lot of moving parts to it.
Yeah, it's never a set it and forget it type thing. And a lot of people, I think, do that when it comes to training routines and even nutrition. People think, okay, I found the best way to train for me. And they think that that means that they found the magical routine and that they never have to change it. And those are the guys that you see in the gym where 6 months from now, a year from now, they're literally doing the exact same thing in the gym. And it probably did produce great results for them at one point, but then they're getting to the point where they're just doing the same thing over and over again, and all they're doing at best is maintaining. And that routine might have been great, and you should milk it for all that you can, but at a certain point you need to understand that what worked then is going to be different than what works now.
Yeah, and for me, my volume is already super high.
Yeah.
And the reason why I switched to full body routines was, one, I wanted to try it, but two, also, I wanted to be able to cut down my workout time, but now I'm like, oh man, I gotta add volume.
Well, that's the issue.
I gotta add volume.
You will run into with full body routines is if you have to add more volume to full body routines, it tends to actually make it longer than adding volume to a body part split or like a one body part session. Because now, especially if you're adding multiple sets of different body parts in one session, and then it requires you switching that exercise to another one, even just the time in between movements and that, and plus a little bit more recovery. Like you said, if you're going from squats, then you're going to bench press, the amount of time you're going to have to rest in between, the amount of time you're going to have to set up the bench transition, it can get time consuming. And that's a challenge you run into with any split. But I always tell people that that's the biggest challenge with full body, especially if you're very strong. The weaker you are, the easier it is to get through a full body session very fast. But the stronger you are, again, if you have to warm up for squats, if you're warming up for a 5-plate squat, that's going to take almost the entire time of workout it would take for somebody to get through an entire squat session who's only trained with 1 plate, So a lot of these things need to get customized the more advanced you get.
So I have a question, I guess a general question. I know it's very, very hard to answer this question, but on a per set basis, again, and I know there's a lot of factors here, what would you say is the bare minimum, forget everything else for a second, what is the bare minimum sets that you need to do? And I know you said the range of like 2 sets is too little and then 20 was too high. But what's like the optimal number of sets per exercise, just in general, that you think is enough to stimulate muscle and to get the most out of that movement? I'm just curious what you think that number is.
So per exercise, per muscle?
Yeah.
I would say...
Not in a workout, just per exercise, period. So forget when you do
just training that exercise. I would say the bare minimum... obviously the right answer is the bare minimum technically is 1 set, and the reason I say that is because if you're taking somebody who's never trained before, they're going to get a huge benefit from forming just 1 set, because that's literally double the volume that they've done because they're doing.
Well, let's say someone who's like more intermediate.
Yeah, we're talking about intermediate, anybody that's been weight training for at least a year. I would say the bare minimum is actually 2. But it's going to be more specific to the exercise itself. Not every single exercise, I would say, is 2. I would say the big compound movements, you're probably going to get a little bit more at the bare minimum being 3. And I think even most basic strength training programs, bodybuilding programs, all kind of have 3 as that standard sweet spot at the bare minimum. But I would say probably the sweet spot is between 2 and 5 sets. And again, it's going to depend on the actual exercise. When I say 2 is going to work really well for body parts that have a lot of overlap to something else. Like let's say you're training chest. Now we're going to talk about if you're doing like front delt work, you easily could get away with just 2 sets of overhead pressing at that point. You know what I mean? But if you're picking 1 back exercise, I wouldn't say just do 2 sets. You know what I mean? 3 is probably going to be your bare minimum up to 5. So somewhere between 2 and 5, I would say.
See, my range is a little bit higher to you. I would say the bare minimum is 3. But I'm starting to think that 3 might not even be, it depends on the person, but 3 might not even be enough. But I would say optimal is probably, again, it depends on the movement, but probably like 5 to, I want to say 8 maybe be too high, but like probably between 4 and 7 is my range. That's
so
kind of like
one exercise.
One exercise, yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
Because I've been training a long time,
Yeah.
and I've been doing right now 3 sets for a lot of these movements.
Yeah.
Again, depending on my volume or whatever, and just 3 sets is just like, it's like enough where you feel like, okay, I did something, but it's not enough to push the envelope to build more muscle. So I think that range is a little bit higher. I mean, again, I may be talking out of individualized for me.
There's definitely gonna be an individual, component to it, but again, it really is gonna depend on other factors, like you said. If we're talking about just the exercise, that's only telling us a little bit of the big picture. So the big picture obviously is, again, how often you're performing that exercise, what's the frequency of you training that body part, which will alter these things a little bit. Obviously, the less frequent you train it, the more you're gonna want to do per session and all these things. But again, it's always kind of the sweet spot in the range, and it's going to change. So, at one point when you switch your training program and you do a different setup, you might be able to get more out of doing 3 sets in the beginning of it. Like you said, now, since you're already adapted to it, you're going to have to bump it up to 4 and 5. So it's kind of like a moving scale, and I think it's definitely within that range. There's a case for going as low as 2 to 3, and there's definitely a case for going as high as 5 to 7 for sure.
I definitely like full body routines. I used to like kind of poo-poo them, and when I was younger, I was like, whatever. But they actually have their place. I would say they're definitely very, very good at putting muscle on. I mean, most of our clients that we use, especially for our gyms and stuff, we have them on full body routines because depending on the person, they're only going to come 2 or 3 times a week, maybe 4.
Yeah.
So I think that's optimal for like the average person to train like that because they're getting a lot of frequency, which is good, and they're going to get stronger faster that way.
Definitely.
But I think for muscle growth, it is really, and this is why these guys did it. It actually works.
It worked.
It works. It definitely works.
It has a proven track record of working more than pretty much any other type of training. Because you can make the argument that bodybuilders on enhancements, they develop the split routine around that whole idea. Because again, we're talking about like the pre-steroid era. That's when all bodybuilders use that full body 3 times per week training. When we got up to like the 60s, 70s, in the early 80s, that's when like the really high frequency, high volume training came out. And then towards the 90s, it kind of tapered back off and it went back the other way to just that typical one body part split training routine. But again, if you go back, all those guys used just full body originally, and it was because they understood the need for rest. You know what I mean? Rest, recovery. And training those big compound movements. The more you got into the split routines and the more typical bro split style of training, the less focus was on the huge big compound movements and lifting extremely heavy weights, And if you're training with, 20 sets in one workout, like per body part, you're probably only doing like 1 or 2 big compound lifts. But when you're doing like those full body sessions, because you're doing so many sets for the entire body, you have to be very specific with what you use, and it's going to kind of pull all the junk volume out of your training. You know what I mean? Because if you're doing full body, you're really, like you said, doing like 1 or 2 exercises max per body part. You're going to pick those big compound movements. You're not going to want to just do a set of flies and a set of dips. So, you're going to do, I'm going to do bench, incline bench, dips, stuff like that.
Right. And I think one of the other major benefits of it too is that it definitely helps you to not get systematically fatigued. We've talked about that before, and it's like, especially with powerlifting type training, which powerlifting type training, especially the program that I put together in my book, is basically you have your big compound movements, and those are the main things for the day, and then the other stuff is like the volume stuff on the outside of it. That can be really taxing, but when you split it up, like, so if you just did, for example, if you just did like a leg day,
right,
that's so fatiguing overall.
Yes.
Whereas if you did like squats and then bench press in a day, it's not as fatiguing. So I think full body routines for overall like fatigue has definitely kept that fatigue overall down. So I like them. I really do. Like I said, I poo-pooed them for so long, but I really like it.
It's a good way, like you said, it's a good way to manage the fatigue because every session is going to have a similar level of fatigue overall.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
Because if you're training the entire body, it doesn't matter which exercises you're picking. If you're doing a similar amount of volume across the entire body, you're doing a similar level of fatigue. Whereas if you do a split routine, and let's just say every day you do 12 or 15 sets per body part. If you're doing 12 to 15 sets of legs, that's going to induce a lot more fatigue than the next day when you might do 12 to 15 sets of biceps and triceps.
Well, the other part of that too is that when you're doing 15 sets for legs or whatever example, insert here body part.
Right.
you're ultimately going to be taking a lot of those sets, not to failure, but really, really close because your muscles are just so fatigued.
Yes.
You're not getting that with full body because if you're doing 5 sets, even if they're 5 hard sets, it's still not overdoing it.
Correct, yeah. 100%. Yeah, the local fatigue for that muscle group from the start of the session to the end of the session is not going to be as great as it would be from doing all those sets in one workout. Yeah. So your recovery for that individual muscle group, the amount of recovery required is less than you would in a one body part per session in a full body session. So you're not going to have a ton to recover from doing a full body.
Yeah. So I would say if you want to give a full body routine a try and you want to actually start out using it, I think one of the best ways to set it up is the way Pete mentioned before. You want to just kind of alternate between a day of working out, a day off, a day of working out, a day off. That's the best stimulus you can get. Take the current volume that you're doing now, just divide it by those 4 workout days and just have kind of workout A, workout B, and do the best movements that you can for those body parts. So like Pete said, maybe flat bench on Monday, incline on Wednesday, whatever it is, and then just go from there. But I think that that's the best starting point for it. And then just build up to the volume that you need to stimulate muscle. But I think it's definitely a great way to train. It's definitely a good balance.
Yeah.
It's definitely a good balance. You're doing the work and then you're leaving the gym and you're recovering. And like I said, I definitely recommend it. So if you want to try it, that's where I would start out with. Anything else that you would kind of add to that as far as like if someone never did it, wanted to try it, what they would do?
Yeah, I think the important thing to focus on, again, even if your goal, like people think of full body as strength routines in a lot of cases, because a lot of strength athletes will use full body routines or upper lower and things like that, but bodybuilders don't necessarily always use it, especially not today. So people might look at it and think, okay, it's a strength routine. When I'm training bodybuilding, I'm focusing on getting a pump, I'm focusing on getting a burn, I'm focusing on feeling that muscle. And the thing with a full body routine is even if your goal is pure muscle growth, I think mentally you shouldn't go in there thinking about it in terms of, okay, I'm going to train the full body, I'm going to get an entire pump from head to toe. You really still need to look at it as your performance as the guidelines and your tracker and measure of like if you're making progress. So I think you should go into it not focusing on, okay, I'm only gonna care about getting stronger, but you need to look at performance over the long haul with that type of training. So if you're starting with a full body routine, you say I want to grow my legs, and you're starting out squatting, let's say 225. The way you're gonna know if you're progressing on that routine and if you're building muscle is, okay, in 6 months from now, am I still squatting 225? Your goal should be get to 275, get to 315. That's gonna build more muscle than you trying to get a pump from head to toe. So the feeling is different when you're doing a full body session. You're not going to get the same pumps the way you would in one session because, again, you're not doing 20 sets for that body part. You're going to get a good pump. It's going to stay in that muscle. When you move to another body part, it's going to leave that muscle. It's going to go into the other body part. You're going to get a nice local, systemic pump across the entire body. But it's not going to be that same burning sensation. And I think a lot of people will leave the gym and feel like, oh, I didn't do anything because my legs aren't on fire. You know what I mean? And that doesn't mean anything for muscle growth. That just means you did a ton of volume in one set. So I think your expectation has to be a little bit different as far as how the session should feel. You don't want to leave a full body session feeling like you're destroyed. You should feel like I stimulated muscle, I feel strong. You should arguably leave a full body session feeling stronger